Close your eyes for a moment, stretched and imagine a world where color does not exist.
Million years.
Not a world
They
drained
filled
of
few
forests,
like a black
plains,
and white photograph,
skies, but
and
something
seas.
stranger still.
Their footsteps
a world where the
shaped
very
the
idea
rhythm
of
of the
color
world.
has never been
Yet
born.
even the longest
where no
rains
creature has
end.
ever known blue,
Life is never
or green,
fixed or red.
It flows like
where
a
oceans
river,
shimmer in
always
light,
changing
but carry
course.
no shade.
And so,
and skies
in
stretch
time,
wide
the giants
and empty
fell.
of hue.
The moment
Imagine
was
that
sudden,
absence not
yet
as
also
loss,
prepared by
but as
deep
the only
time.
reality there
For
was.
millions of years.
This is not fantasy.
The Earth shifted
For most
beneath
of
them.
Earth's history.
Volcanic
this was
eruptions
truth.
in India.
The story of
darkened
color
the
is not as
skies
old
with
as the
smoke
story of
and
life.
ash. For billions
Poisoning
of
the
years,
air with
the
carbon
world
dioxide
unfolded in
and
soundless
sulfur.
tones of light.
Seas
and
withdrew
shadow
from coasts,
not yet translated
Climates
into color.
lurched between
and it is
warmth
here,
and chill,
in this ancient
ecosystem
silence,
strain,
that a fossil was
Yet
buried.
still,
the
the
fossil we will
dinosaurs
follow
endured.
tonight
They
belongs
had
to that
faced upheaval
uncolored world.
before.
It lay
They had
hidden
adapted,
for eons,
survived,
pressed into
thrived.
stone, waiting
But then,
in patience
from
through
the heavens
endless
came
passage
something
of
they
time.
could not outlast.
When it lived, it knew no
66
hues,
million years
no painted
ago,
world.
an
Around
asteroid
it,
approached the
creatures
Earth.
sensed
It
vibrations
was 6 miles
and touch.
wide,
The faint
a fragment
chemistry
of the
cosmic
waters,
stone
the pull of
carrying
tides,
unimaginable
but not
energy.
the beauty of color.
When it struck
To
the
imagine the
shallow
time of
waters
this
of
fossil
the
is to
Yucatan
step
Peninsula,
into a world where
the
sight
world was
itself had
unmade
not yet
in a
fully
single
awakened.
instant.
But what is
The
color
impact
truly?
released
We
heat
like to
and
believe that
fire
the greenness
beyond
of a
comprehension,
leaf or the redness
forests
of a stone
ignited
exists
across
in the
continents.
objects themselves.
Shockwaves
painted
tore
into
through
them
land
like
and
pigment
sea.
on canvas.
The sky
Yet
filled
science
with
whispers
vaporized
another
rock,
truth.
rising
Color is
into
not
a
in the
shroud
leaf,
that circled
nor in
the
the
globe.
stone.
In the
Color is a
days that
story
followed,
told by light,
darkness fell,
and by eyes.
Sunlight could
and by
not
the brain
pierce
that
the thick
receives their
veil
signal.
of dust and
When
ash.
sunlight strikes the
air
surface of a
chilled,
leaf, much of
plants
the light
withered,
is absorbed.
food chains
But
collapsed.
certain wavelengths
For
are
creatures
reflected
dependent
outward,
on abundance,
streaming into the
on
air.
vast
These
forests
waves
of
enter our
leaves,
eyes.
on herds
Inside,
of prey,
tiny
the
receptors
famine was
tuned to
inescapable.
long, medium,
The great
and short
dinosaurs
wavelengths
who had roamed
respond
so
with faint
long
electric
and
whispers.
so far faltered.
The brain gathers
one
those
by
signals,
one,
lineages
them,
vanish,
and presents
until
us with a
silence
sensation
spread once more
green.
across the
To
earth.
us, it feels
Yet even in
solid,
that silence,
obvious, small
undeniable.
voices endured.
But in reality,
not all
it is a
dinosaurs
construction.
perished.
Without the
Birds,
eye to receive,
fragile
without the
descendants
mind
of
to
feathered
translate,
lineages,
there is no
found
green.
ways to
This
survive.
truth can be
Clinging
unsettling.
to seeds,
Without perception,
insects,
the world
and
is not
adaptation.
filled with colors.
Alongside
it is
them,
filled with
another
light,
group
with
that had
energy,
lived in the shadows,
with patterns
now
that exist
stirred
without
into prominence.
experience.
The
Color
mammals
requires a witness.
For more than
And in the
150
ancient world,
million
there was
years,
no such witness.
Mammals had existed
Still,
as
light
small
washed across
nocturnal
the planet
creatures,
then, just as it does
scurrying
now.
in darkness,
Wavelengths
feeding
of
on
every
insects,
kind passed through the
hiding
skies
beneath the
and
weight
bounced
of
across the
reptilian
seas.
dominance.
1,000
They
shades
lived
of light
in burrows,
existed in potential
in crevices,
yet none of
in
it was
quiet
known as
places
blue
where
or
giants
gold
paid them
or
no
violet.
heed.
It was
Their
waiting
strength was
for
not
vision,
size,
for
but
eyes,
subtlety.
for life to
Warm-blooded,
transform physics
fur-covered,
into perception.
milk-bearing.
The fossil we
They were
speak of lived in
caretakers
that
of
interval.
small lives.
It
in
carried
a
on its
world
small
that favored
existence in
grandeur.
oceans without
After
color.
the asteroid,
It lived.
It was these
it died,
traits that
it was
proved
buried,
essential.
and in stone
While the
it
dinosaurs
endured.
starved,
Through upheavals
many mammals
and
could
extinctions,
eat roots,
through the rising of
seeds,
mountains
and insects,
the falling of seas,
food still
it remained
available in the dim
untouched.
light.
A
Their
patient
small
witness
size
to a
required
story
less
it could never
sustenance.
see.
Their
When it was
capacity
alive,
for warmth
the creatures
helped
that
them
surrounded
endure
it
the
did
cooling
not look at the
climate.
world.
They survived
sensed it
not
instead
because they were
through
powerful,
the language of chemistry,
but because they were
the
humble.
currents of water,
And so,
the vibration
out of catastrophe,
nearby
a
movement.
new chapter
They
opened.
lived in darkness
With the
and
fall
shadow,
of giants,
not in color.
niches were left
Perhaps
empty.
they perceived
Forests
brightness and
regrew.
dimness.
Seas
The difference
replenished.
between the shimmer of
Ecosystems
daylight and the
reset.
veil of night.
Mammals,
but never
once
hues.
confined to
Never
shadows,
the full canvas
now
of vision
emerged
that
into
we
daylight.
cannot now imagine
Over time,
living without.
they diversified.
Pause for a moment
Some
to consider
grew
that
larger.
Imagine
Others
the seas
returned
rolling
to the
across
seas.
the globe,
Still
stirred
others
by
stretched
tides,
toward the
thick with
sky
minerals,
and glides
alive
and
with
leaps.
the earliest
From their
stirrings
quiet
of animal
resilience
life. came
Picture
the roots
volcanoes
of the future.
spilling fire,
lightning striking through
the fall of
skies dense with
dinosaurs,
atmosphere,
and the rise
rain
of mammals
falling is a
in
meditation
endless cycles.
on fragility
All of this
and
existed.
inheritance.
All of this unfolded.
Power is never permanent.
Yet no creature
Dominance
called it beautiful,
is always
no
fleeting.
creature named
The
its
titans
shades.
of one
The
age
ocean
become
shimmered,
the fossils
but
of
no
the
eye
next.
ever called them
Yet
blue.
each fall
The sun
clears
set,
the way
but no
for
being
new beginnings,
ever marveled at crimson
for new
skies.
dreams to
For
take
millions
form.
of years,
Life
Earth
does not
was
cling
unseen,
to what was lost.
a silent stage awaiting the
transforms.
birth of sight.
The Garden of
Now
Earth
contrast
is
that
always
world with ours.
replanted after
Today,
fire,
color defines
flood,
so much
or
of human
stone.
life. For
We
humans,
are immersed in it.
the gift
Guided
of
by it,
mammals
moved
is
by it.
intimate.
We
For
choose
we are
colors
their
to decorate our
descendants.
homes.
We
to
carry
surround
within
ourselves
us
with
the
moods
inheritance
calm
of their
or
endurance.
excitement.
We
The
wear
warm
colors
blood
to
that
express
beats
identity,
against the cold,
to signal
the
emotion.
fur transformed
into
in
hair,
language,
the
in
parental
ritual,
care
color
that
is
nurses
essential
the fragile young.
Red carries
We are
passion,
not born of
warning,
giants
and fire,
but of small
blue
survivors
speaks of
who
peace,
endured
stillness,
catastrophe
and infinity.
by tending
Green is the
quietly to
breath
life.
of forests
Our
and
story
fields,
is written
the shade
not in
of
dominance,
renewal,
but
our
in
emotions
persistence,
too.
To
are
reflect
colored.
on this,
We
is
feel
to find
blue when
humility.
sorrowful.
We
are
are
not
not
the
red in
pinnacle
anger.
of Earth's
We grow
history,
green with envy,
nor the destined
world
rulers of
and
its
our
future.
language.
We are
painted with
one
meaning.
branch of the
Color
tree
is not
that
an
grew
accessory to
after
life.
silence.
It is woven
One
into our
expression of a
experience
possibility that
If all
emerged
color were
when
taken
giants
away,
fell.
the world
To
would
see
feel
ourselves in
ghost-like,
this light
drained
is
of
to
essence.
understand that
And
survival
yet, for
is
the
not
fossils
about
world,
conquest.
that was the norm.
But about
Life
harmony
flourished
with
without
change.
hue. About
Organisms
flexibility,
survived,
about
evolved,
patience,
and thrived
the asteroid
without ever
that ended the
perceiving the
dinosaurs
painted
did
richness
not
we
end
find
life.
so
It
indispensable.
redirected it.
What we call
It
absence
opened the way
was,
for
them
mammals to
reality.
rise.
For
This brings
primates
us
to
to the
evolve.
question that will
For
guide our
humans,
journey.
Did
Eventually,
color exist
to
before
emerge.
it could be seen?
In this
Physics
sense,
says
we
yes.
owe our
Wavelengths
existence
of
to
light
catastrophe,
filled the air
to an
and
event
water.
that destroyed
But psychology
much, but
and
left the
philosophy
seed
remind
of
us.
potential alive.
Without perception,
The gift
there
of
is no
mammals
color,
is the
only
gift
light.
of continuation.
Color is not the
the
world
chance
itself,
to dream a
but our
different
encounter
dream
with it.
upon the earth.
So what is real?
And so,
Is the greenness
as
of
we
grass
listen
a
to the
property
silence
of the
after the
grass,
fall,
or a creation of the
not
mind
despair,
that sees it?
but promise.
Is the redness of
For
sunset
every
a
ending
quality of the
is
sky,
also a beginning,
or an
the
interpretation
sky that once
shaped by
belonged to
biology?
pterosaurs,
The fossil
and feathered
lying
reptiles
quietly in its
now
bed of
sings
stone
with
presses
birds.
this question
The
upon
land
us.
once ruled
It is
by
a reminder that
dinosaurs
what
now
feels
teems
certain
with
is
mammals
often
of
fragile,
every form.
that reality
The
may
story
not
of
be
life
as solid
does not
as it
end.
appears.
It
That
changes
much of
its
what
voice.
we know is
It
born
changes
inside
its
us.
rhythm.
This
It
fossil is
remembers,
more than stone,
and it continues.
It is a guide. The
It
fall of
leads us
giants
backward
is not
through
tragedy
time to an
alone.
earth before
It is
sight,
the rhythm
before
of
color,
impermanence,
before
the turning of the
bloomed
earth's
in hues.
great page.
It invites us
And
to
we,
step slowly
sitting
into
here
that
in the
forgotten
quiet
silence,
are
to
part
wonder
of
at
the
what came
strangeness
after,
of a world
the continuation of a
unpainted.
dream
And so we
that
begin,
began
with
long
breath
before
slowed,
names,
with mind open.
long before
We
memory,
follow this fossil
long
into the
before
shadowed
time
ages.
itself.
From here, we will trace the awakening of sight, the first light-sensitive cells, the rise of eyes, the flowering of color across the canvas of life. We will move outward, to psychology, to art, to the cosmos itself. But for now, we begin here, in silence, in stillness, in a world before color. The fossil rests in silence, but silence was the language of the world it came from. A world before color, before shapes were painted into vision, before the eyes of creatures could carve light into meaning. If we could return to those days, we would not recognize the earth. Not because the land and sea were absent. They were there, oceans swelling, mountains forming, clouds drifting across the sky, but because there was no one to see them as we see them now. Without perception, the world was shapeless. Without color, it was voiceless. Life itself was already present, fragile but determined. Single-celled organisms drifted in the seas. Primitive creatures clung to the sediments of shallow waters. They lived in a reality guided not by vision, but by chemistry. Molecules carried signals. The faintest traces of food or toxin could be detected by sensitive membranes. Survival depended not on sight, but on contact, on the invisible signatures carried through water. Imagine living in that way, guided only by gradients of chemical change, by warmth or cold, by the subtle vibration of currents. The world would not be a landscape, not even a scene, but a pattern of signals. What was near, what was safe, what was dangerous. A reality without pictures, without hues, without horizons. The fossil before us belonged to such an earth. It arose in an age when creatures had not yet asked for light, had not yet been given the gift of seeing. Its world was both abundant and minimal, abundant in the complexity of living chemistry, minimal in experience, uncolored and unshaped. To us, accustomed to vision, this seems like deprivation. But perhaps it was simply different. Perhaps it was a kind of richness we can no longer imagine. For when the mind is not busy interpreting color, form, and distance, it must live fully in the intimacy of touch, of presence, of what is immediately here. For millions of years, this was enough. Life did not need to see the ocean to survive in it. It did not need to name the sky to feel the warmth of the sun. The absence of color, then, was not emptiness. It was a kind of simplicity, a stage upon which later complexity would unfold. It was a quiet canvas waiting for vision to paint upon it. Consider the sky itself. Today, we call it blue. We admire its clarity, its vastness, its ever-shifting palette at dawn and dusk. But in the pre-color world, the sky was simply light. Not blue, not gray, not even white. It was brightness without hue. The oceans beneath reflected that light, shimmering waves dancing with energy, but no creature thought them azure, or green, or turquoise. Those words, those experiences, had not yet been born. Even the land was silent. Rocks, minerals, crystals, all of them absorbed and reflected light in particular ways, but none of it was translated into the experience of color. Iron might gleam, gold might glisten, but no creature called them red or yellow. The minerals simply were, without witness, without description. This silence is almost impossible for us to feel. We are so deeply tied to color that we measure our moods in it. We find beauty in it. We dream in it. To strip it away feels like stripping away the heart of the world. Yet the fossil tells us that life did not begin in a painted landscape. It began in shadows, in chemical whispers, in darkness that was alive with unseen possibility. And there is something humbling in this realization. Color is not essential to life. It is an addition, a flowering, an expansion that came later. For billions of years, the earth turned without it. For billions of years, life adapted, multiplied, and survived in its absence. So perhaps we should not think of the pre-color world as lacking, but as fundamental, a foundation upon which later wonders would be built. Just as silence gives meaning to sound, and stillness gives meaning to movement, so too did the absence of color give rise to its eventual bloom. The fossil before us, pressed into stone, carries this silence. Its body belonged to a world where nothing was yet painted. It is not only a relic of biology, but a relic of perception, a reminder that the world we know is not the world as it always was. And as we linger on this thought, a question stirs. Was that world less real, or more? If no one saw the oceans as blue, were they still blue? If no one witnessed the sunset, did it blaze in crimson fire, or was it simply light fading into shadow? The answer depends on how we define reality. Physics tells us the wavelengths were there. Philosophy tells us color is a construct. The fossil lies silent between these truths, asking us to wonder, not to decide. So we drift, as the fossil drifts, between silence and sound, between shadow and color. We rest for a moment in a world that is both familiar and utterly alien, a world where light shines, but nothing yet sees. This is where our journey truly begins. For millions of years, life drifted through the oceans without eyes. Creatures moved by instinct and chemistry, by vibration and touch, responding to what was near and immediate. Yet light had always been there, streaming from the sun, shimmering through water, reflecting from stone. The world was full of it, but life had not yet learned to see. Then, in time beyond imagination, something changed. A simple cell, sensitive to light, emerged. Not an eye as we know it, but a beginning, a patch of molecules that could respond to brightness and darkness. This was the first step toward vision. A revolution had begun, though no creature could have known it. Imagine what that meant. For the first time, life could tell day from night, shadow from light. The shimmering patterns of the sun became signals. Predators could sense when something passed between them and the glow above. Prey could detect the dimming that meant danger was near. These primitive senses did not yet paint a world, but they carved existence into contrasts, light and shadow, presence and absence. And from that simple division, everything else would unfold. The first eyes were nothing more than dim sensors, specks of tissue able to tell brightness from darkness. Yet even this tiny gift changed the rules of survival. To sense light was to move toward it, or away from it, to seek warmth or avoid danger. In an ocean that had been blind for eons, these faint glimmers of perception offered an edge. Over millions of years, those specks deepened. They curled inward, forming cups that could catch light from one direction more than another. In that shallow curve, life took another step. Now it was not just brightness, but position. A creature could know not only that light existed, but where it came from. The shadows began to tell a story. From cups came deeper pits, and from pits came lenses. Transparent tissues bent the light, focusing it into clearer shapes. Vision sharpened. Outlines appeared. Movement could be tracked with speed and accuracy. Life had opened its eyes. This was the Cambrian world, over 500 million years ago. The seas swarmed with creatures unlike anything we know. Trilobites, with their compound eyes, looked upon the ocean with thousands of lenses. Early predators swam through the waters, their sight granting them new power, new strategies, new dominance. Prey that had once been safe in silence were now exposed to eyes that pierced shadow. Evolution accelerated. Life bloomed in complexity. This moment in history is often called the Cambrian explosion, a sudden diversification of forms, and vision was one of the sparks that set it alight. But vision in these early ages was not yet color. It was still a world of contrasts, dark against light, stillness against motion. Imagine the ocean then, full of light but unpainted, its creatures aware of shape and shimmer but not hue. They could follow shadows, avoid danger, pursue movement, but they could not yet marvel at a rainbow or be drawn to the bright signal of a mate's color. And yet, in that first unfolding of vision, color was waiting. The machinery was already being prepared. In those light-sensitive cells, the pigments that responded to different wavelengths were beginning to diversify. Over vast stretches of time, some creatures evolved not just one type of receptor, but several. Where once they sensed only brightness, they began to detect differences in wavelength. And with that difference came possibility. It is humbling to think of how slowly this unfolded. From the first patch of light-sensitive molecules to the first complex eyes, hundreds of millions of years passed. Generation after generation, imperceptible changes built upon one another. Each step was a fragment of advantage, a predator that could strike more effectively, a prey animal that could hide more swiftly. Evolution has no foresight, no intention, and yet from this patient process, sight emerged. And as sight deepened, So too did the canvas of the world. At first, only shadow and shimmer. Later, brightness with direction. Later still, outlines and shapes, movement across distance. Until finally, color itself began to appear. What had been unseen for billions of years would at last burst into experience. But here, at this stage of the story, we remain at the threshold. Life has opened its eyes, but the palette is not yet painted. The world is divided into light and dark, a realm of contrasts rather than hues. The fossil we hold belonged to this early dawn. It lay beneath oceans that were seen only as brightness and shadow. It drifted in a world where the dance of sunlight on water was not yet blue, not yet green, only a shifting field of brightness and dimness. There is something almost mystical in this thought, that the ocean has always sparkled, that the sun has always set, that minerals have always reflected light, but for so long, no being saw them. And when sight finally arrived, it did so slowly, cautiously, piece by piece. The eyes of the early Cambrian did not reveal what ours do. They were windows only into light and shadow. It is in this moment of history that we find the first glimmer of perception, the first awakening. The fossil reminds us that the world we know has not always been here. What feels natural, to look, to see, to recognize color, was once a dream unrealized. And so, we pause at this threshold, on the edge of transformation. Sight has opened, but color still waits in silence. The fossil lies in stone, marking the divide between blindness and vision, between silence and the first whispers of light. Beyond this point, the story will bloom. Beyond this point, the world will begin to be painted. But for now, we rest here, in a world of shadows. A world where eyes have just begun to open. A world where light is finally seen, but not yet named. Long before color was seen, it was already written into the fabric of the earth. Not in the way we know it, not as the vivid experience of hues, but as chemistry, as the silent play of light and matter. The rocks, the seas, the atmosphere, all of them carried the ingredients of color. The world was waiting, painted in wavelengths and pigments, but there were no eyes to bring the painting to life. When light meets matter, something profound happens. Some wavelengths are absorbed, others are reflected. Molecules and minerals respond differently to the spectrum of sunlight, scattering or swallowing certain portions of it. Iron-rich rocks would have glowed in rusty tones. Copper would have shone in blue-green. Ancient seas, thick with algae, might have glimmered with their own hues. But none of this was experienced. It was chemistry without witness, a silent dialogue of light and matter, with no one to translate it into perception. Even the sky itself is an illusion of scattering. Today we call it blue, but in truth, it is the way air molecules scatter short wavelengths of sunlight more than long ones. That scattering happened in the ancient skies just as it does now. The heavens above the fossil were likely just as filled with potential color, but no creature looked upward and called it beautiful. To the living world then, the sky was simply brightness. And in the oceans, pigments were already at work. Chlorophyll, the molecule that allows plants and algae to turn sunlight into energy, absorbs red and blue light, reflecting the green that we now see. In those early seas, chlorophyll was already present, already shaping life's destiny. The water may have been filled with green potential, but not one being saw it. The pigment worked silently, invisible in a world without eyes. Pigments themselves are nothing mysterious. They are arrangements of atoms that interact with light in precise ways. Hemoglobin in blood, chlorophyll in plants, melanin in skin, all are forms of nature's chemistry of color. Long before creatures could see, these pigments shaped life. They absorbed energy, protected against harmful radiation, and powered the transformation of sunlight into food. They were tools of survival, not expressions of beauty. It is tempting to think that color was invented when vision arrived, but the truth is more subtle. Color existed as potential, as physics, as chemistry. The dance of light and pigment was as old as life itself. What changed was not the world, but the way the world was perceived. The arrival of vision turned physics into experience, chemistry into meaning. The fossil before us belongs to that silent stage. It lived in a sea rich with light, rich with pigments, rich with wavelengths that painted reality in ways unseen. Its body carried molecules that absorbed and reflected light, as all bodies do. But it never knew itself as colored. It never looked upon another creature and saw hue. It lived in chemistry, not in vision. This distinction invites reflection. We tend to believe that what we see is the truth of the world, that the green of a leaf, the blue of the ocean, the gold of sunlight is inherent in nature itself. But the fossil reminds us that color is only part of the story. The leaf would still reflect those wavelengths even if no eye perceived them. The ocean would still scatter light even if no creature called it blue. The chemistry was there long before perception. So which is more real, the world as physics or the world as experience? Perhaps both, perhaps neither. Physics gives us the foundation, the wavelengths, the pigments, the scattering of light. Experience gives us the painting, the brilliance of the sky, the calm of green, the fire of red. Without physics, color cannot be. Without perception, it cannot be known. Both truths exist, layered upon one another. It is humbling to imagine a planet alive with chemistry, rich in the possibilities of color, yet unseen. A world where pigments absorbed and reflected, where light scattered and shimmered, but where all of it passed unnoticed, untransformed. The earth was ready for beauty, but beauty had not yet been born. The fossil carries this paradox within it. Its life was touched by light, shaped by pigments, formed from molecules that played with the spectrum. Yet none of that was translated into vision. It is as though the world spoke a language no one had yet learned, a message written, waiting for the invention of eyes. And so the story of color begins not with sight, but with chemistry, with atoms arranged in ways that bend light, absorb it, scatter it, with pigments that served survival long before they served beauty, with a world painted in potential long before the canvas was revealed. As we hold this fossil in thought, we feel the weight of that silence. It lived in a universe filled with light, but not yet with color. It belonged to an earth painted in invisible hues, where chemistry was the only witness. And from this silence, from this potential, vision would one day rise. The eyes of future creatures would awaken to what had always been there. The world would not change, but the experience of it would. In this way, color is both ancient and new. Ancient as the atoms that scattered light in the early skies, new as the first creature that saw those skies as blue. Ancient as the pigments that filled the seas with potential, new as the mind that could name them. The fossil sits at the threshold of that transition, a reminder that the earth was always painted, but only later was it seen. Here we pause, in the quiet realization that color did not arrive with vision. It was always here, hidden in chemistry, waiting. The fossil lay buried in this invisible world, a silent bridge between physics and perception. And in the chapters to come, we will see how eyes unveiled that hidden spectrum, how the silent chemistry of light and pigment became the living palette of existence. It rests in stone, silent, immovable, a fragment of life held fast by time. To call it a fossil is to give it a name, but what it truly is memory, not memory as we carry it, not the fleeting traces of thought, but the deep memory of the earth itself. Layer upon layer of rock has pressed it into permanence, sealing away a body that once moved through water, once fed, once sought survival under skies that no creature yet called blue. When we hold such a fossil in our hands, we are not merely holding stone. We are holding an echo of life, a being that once breathed in a world without color, a world seen only in shadows and brightness, now speaks across the abyss of time. Its voice is not in words, not in sound, but in presence, in the fact that it remains at all, in the fact that its form endured while almost everything else was lost. This fossil, like countless others, was once a living thing. Perhaps it scuttled across the ocean floor, perhaps it drifted in currents, perhaps it filtered sunlight through its tissues. Its existence was small, ordinary, unremarkable in its day. But through some quiet miracle of chance, it did not vanish completely. Sediment covered it, mineral replaced it, and what was once fragile became stone. Now it rests not as it was, but as an impression, a trace, a testimony. It is tempting to see fossils as relics, as dead things. But they are not dead. They are stories. They are bridges. They are windows through which we glimpse a world that no longer exists. Each one is a witness, not just to its own life, but to the time in which it lived, a time when eyes were awakening, when pigments were silent, when color was only chemistry waiting for perception. Imagine this creature in its prime, unaware of its role in any grand story. It did not know it was part of a world in transition. It did not know that one day its hardened remains would be touched by hands belonging to a species not yet conceived, beneath skies not yet imagined. It lived as all creatures do, moment to moment, day to day, seeking food, seeking survival. Yet by surviving through stone, it became more than it ever was in life. It became a witness, holding within itself the memory of an age we can no longer see. This is the paradox of fossils. They are both fragile and eternal. The creature itself was fleeting, its life gone in an instant against the canvas of deep time. But the stone remains, outlasting mountains, enduring eons. It lies in silence until discovered, and then, like a whisper awakened, it begins to speak again, not with words, but with shape, with form, with the power of presence. The fossil reminds us of something humbling, that the world we know, full of color and sight, is a late arrival. That for vast stretches of history, the earth was lived in but not seen. The fossil was there long before eyes beheld blue skies or red sunsets. It is proof that existence does not depend on perception. The world was rich long before it was noticed. And yet, as humans, we give it meaning. We look at its form and imagine the waters it once knew. We see in its shape the echoes of a world of shadow and light. We project ourselves into its silence, and in doing so, we create connection. That is what makes the fossil a witness, not just its endurance, but our recognition of what it endured. Without us, it is stone. With us, it becomes story. The fossil's witness is also impartial. It carries no memory of beauty, no record of how the world looked. It testifies not through perception, but through survival. Its testimony is simple. Life was here. The details we supply, the interpretations we weave, are ours. Yet in that simplicity lies its power. It grounds us in reality. It anchors us in the knowledge that life has always sought to endure, even in worlds without color, even in times before sight. Holding such a fossil can stir a quiet reverence. The weight in the hand is ordinary, a piece of stone, nothing more. And yet, it is extraordinary. It is older than mountains, older than rivers, older than forests. It was formed in a chapter of Earth's history so distant that the continents themselves were not where they are now. It reminds us that the world has been many worlds, each with its own rules, its own silences, its own awakenings. The fossil does not ask for anything. It does not require recognition. It would remain in stone whether or not we found it. But in finding it, we become participants in its story. We allow it to bear witness not just to the past, but to the present, to us, to our wonder, to our questions. It becomes part of a dialogue between what was and what is. And so we listen, not to words, but to silence, not to color, but to form. The fossil carries within it the stillness of ages, the patience of deep time. Its voice is not loud, but it does not fade. It reminds us of a world that lived without sight, a world painted only in chemistry, a world before color was known. In this way, the fossil is both an object and a presence, both stone and story, both past and present. It is a witness not only to its own age, but to the unfolding of perception itself. It marks the boundary between silence and awareness, between chemistry and experience. It lies in our hands as a bridge across hundreds of millions of years, a quiet testament to what endures when everything else is lost. And as we reflect upon it, we prepare to follow its testimony further, to ask how the unseen became seen, how the silent chemistry of light became the living palette of vision. The fossil has carried us this far, from blindness to sight, from chemistry to possibility. Now it waits, as we step closer to the moment when color itself first broke into the world. Life in its earliest forms was shaped by necessity. To survive, to reproduce, to persist, these were its only imperatives. But as the ages unfolded, survival took on new strategies, and one of the most extraordinary was color. Not color as we know it today, not yet the dazzling spectacles of feathers and flowers, but the faint beginnings, pigments hidden within cells, patterns written into bodies, glimmers that spoke not of beauty but of survival. The earth was already filled with pigments long before eyes opened to them. Chlorophyll painted the oceans green in silence, protecting and powering photosynthetic life. Carotenoids, deep within cells, shielded against the harshness of sunlight. Melanin, in primitive forms, absorbed and dissipated radiation. These molecules were the first artists of the earth, painting not for aesthetics but for function, laying down invisible strokes upon a canvas unseen. Imagine a world of shallow seas where microbial mats spread like carpets across tidal flats. Their surfaces shimmered faintly in hues we would call green or orange or red. To us, these mats might look like stained glass beneath the water, glowing under sunlight. But to themselves, these colors were armor, a way of enduring the ultraviolet fury of the young sun. They did not produce pigment to be seen, but to survive. Color began then not as expression, but as protection. As life diversified, new pigments arose. Some captured energy more efficiently, some shielded against damage, some even served as deterrents against predators by making cells toxic. Slowly, bodies became chemical landscapes, marked by patterns that hinted at what was to come. Even in blindness, the seeds of beauty were being sown. And then something remarkable happened. The first eyes began to form, not eyes as we think of them, not orbs that gaze upon the world, but tiny, light-sensitive patches of cells. These primitive organs could not yet see shapes, could not yet discern detail. They could only distinguish light from darkness. Yet in that ability, a door cracked open. For the first time, life could respond not just to touch, not just to chemical gradients, but to the very presence of light. What followed was one of the greatest experiments in evolution. Those simple, Light-sensitive cells gave creatures the ability to orient themselves toward the sun, to find better feeding grounds, to avoid lurking predators. The advantage was immense. Over generations, those cells deepened into cups, crude pits that could detect direction as well as brightness. Slowly, the shadows sharpened. With the rise of vision, color's role began to shift. For billions of years, pigments had existed as silent chemistry. But now perception arrived to meet them. Now the potential of color could become experience. The world that had been brightness and shadow was on the verge of something more profound. At first, perception was limited. The earliest eyes could detect only certain wavelengths, most sensitive to the bluish part of the spectrum, where sunlight penetrates water most deeply. To these creatures, the world was not full of hues, but dominated by contrasts, by faint gradients of light in the sea. Yet even this was enough to shape survival. Prey could be seen. Predators could be avoided. The silent pigments of the world began to matter in a new way. As eyes grew more sophisticated, so did the pigments that bodies produced. Some organisms evolved bright shells, not yet to dazzle, but to protect, pigments that blocked sunlight or that made tissues unpalatable. Others developed iridescence, structural colors created not by pigment, but by the microscopic layering of surfaces reflecting light in shimmering displays. These too began as accidents of form, as survival mechanisms. But they laid the groundwork for what was to come, the explosion of beauty. The fossil we carry in thought belongs to this threshold. Its life unfolded in a world where pigments had long existed, but vision was only beginning. It lived in an age of experiments, where evolution was testing sight, testing color, testing new ways for life to perceive and be perceived. The chemistry of pigments was meeting the biology of eyes, and together they were writing a new chapter in the history of Earth. Color, in this sense, was not invented, it was revealed. It had been there all along, hidden in molecules and wavelengths, waiting for eyes to discover it. The first creatures to glimpse it did not understand it as we do, did not name it, did not find beauty in it. But they responded to it, and in doing so, they gave color a place in the living world. From here, the path was inevitable. Evolution would take those first crude eyes and refine them again and again in countless creatures across oceans and continents. Perception would expand, from brightness to shadow, from shadow to contrast, from contrast to hue. The pigments of the world, once silent, would begin to speak. They would not speak in language, but in attraction and warning, in survival and display. The world would slowly transform, not in its physical reality, but in the way it was experienced. These early experiments remind us of a profound truth. Beauty begins in necessity. What we now call vibrant, dazzling, breathtaking began as survival. Pigments were shields. Iridescence was accident. Eyes were tools to avoid danger. Yet from these humble beginnings arose the entire spectrum of beauty we know today. The colors of forests, the shimmer of wings, the brilliance of flowers. What was once protection became expression. What was once necessity became art. And so, the first painters were not artists in any conscious sense. They were microbes, algae, early animals, all carrying pigments in their bodies, all writing with light long before eyes could read. Evolution itself was the painter, experimenting across eons, discovering how to bend light, how to see it, how to live within its endless spectrum. The fossil lies at the center of this story, a silent witness to the moment when chemistry began to be seen. In its stone-locked form is the memory of an age when color was first becoming more than pigment, more than protection, more than silent chemistry. It was becoming visible. It was becoming part of life's dialogue. And in that moment, the world changed forever. For once eyes could see, color could never again be silent. For most of Earth's history, there was no such thing as seeing. Life existed in darkness, even under the brightest sun, because nothing alive could truly receive the world through light. Organisms sensed their surroundings through touch, through chemical traces drifting in water, through vibrations carried along the currents. Existence was intimate, immediate, but profoundly limited. And then, in silence, something extraordinary began. A few cells, sensitive to light, developed the ability to detect brightness. Nothing more, at first. No shapes, no distances, no colors. Merely the distinction between light and dark. But in that distinction lay the seed of vision. It is humbling to imagine the first creatures that lived with this new faculty. Their world had always been a landscape of blind navigation. Suddenly, they could turn toward the glow of the surface, drifting upward to where the light was stronger. They could move toward safety, away from predators lurking in shadow. They could find food by sensing the difference between brightness and obscurity. In these simplest acts of orientation, sight was born. The early eyes were not orbs with pupils and lenses. They were patches of photoreceptive tissue, tiny fields of cells that responded when struck by light. But nature is a patient experimenter. Over countless generations, these patches deepened into small cups, allowing creatures not only to sense brightness, but to determine direction. With the deepening came nuance. Shadows became sharper. Movement could be noticed. The world gained outlines. This innovation changed everything. For the first time, organisms could predict. To sense light was to anticipate, to know that something was coming near. Those with better light perception had the advantage. They survived more often, reproduced more frequently, passed on their gift to the next generation. Eyes evolved not through intention, but through the quiet arithmetic of survival. What began as a light-sensitive spot slowly transformed into an organ of astonishing complexity. Lenses appeared, concentrating light and sharpening vision. Retinas formed, layered with cells that process signals. The ability to detect edges, to recognize motion, to distinguish between the faintest differences in brightness, all followed. We know this story not because we can look directly into those lost ages, but because the fossil record whispers it to us. Ancient trilobites, encased in stone, reveal compound eyes, mosaics of tiny lenses that looked out onto ancient seas. Their eyes are among the earliest preserved in detail, and they tell us that, by the Cambrian period, vision was not only present but thriving. To gaze upon a trilobite fossil is to witness the moment when the Earth began to be seen. This was not merely an improvement in survival. It was a revolution in experience. The world, once felt through chemicals and currents, became a visible landscape. Prey and predator entered a new dance, as seeing demanded stealth and camouflage, speed and evasion. The arms race of life intensified. Shapes sharpened, behaviors shifted. The Earth itself seemed to quicken, as though vision had awakened an entirely new tempo. But at this stage, color was still in the background. Early eyes were attuned mostly to contrasts, to brightness and shadow. They could not yet distinguish hues. To live with such vision was to live in grayscale, perceiving the world as patterns of light. Still, this grayscale world was infinitely richer than blindness. To see it all was a miracle. Consider the difference between a world without vision and one with even the simplest eyes. In blindness, the universe is a blur of nearness and contact, a constant negotiation with what touches or surrounds you. In vision, distance opens up. The future becomes visible. A predator is not merely felt when it bites, but anticipated as it approaches. A source of food is not stumbled upon but sought out, pursued, chosen. With vision, possibility itself expands. The birth of sight was not a single event, but a scattered blossoming. In different lineages across the seas, eyes evolved in parallel. Nature discovered them again and again, refining the design, adapting it to circumstance. Some eyes became compound, wide fields of view made from hundreds of small lenses. Others became single orbs capable of sharper focus. There was no single path, but many, each leading toward new ways of seeing. And all the while, color waited. Pigments had been painted into the bodies of organisms for eons, unnoticed. The sky above the seas blazed with wavelengths invisible to the creatures beneath it. The chemistry of light was everywhere, but the eyes had not yet awakened to its richness. For now, they saw a world of shadow. And yet, in that shadow lay the promise of something greater. When the first true eyes opened, the earth became visible for the very first time. Rivers of light coursed into tiny photoreceptors. Forms and motions began to exist in perception, not just in blind interaction. The earth's silence softened, and life stepped into a new dialogue with the cosmos. To see was to know that there was more. There is a profound humility in this moment. We, with our complex eyes and vivid color vision, are the inheritors of this ancient gift. We carry within us the memory of those first patches of light-sensitive cells, the lineage of creatures that learned to see. Our eyes, as intricate as they are built from the same principle, the detection of light. We are part of that long unfolding story, stretching back hundreds of millions of years, when sight was a new experiment, tentative and crude. And yet, even in its crudeness, it was transformative. Vision expanded the relationship between life and environment, between self and world. For the first time, the earth was not only lived in but seen. The fossil in our imagination, silent and stonebound, belongs to this transition. It bore witness to the threshold between blindness and vision, between shadow and shape. It lived in a time when the world was first becoming visible, when the seas stirred with new watchers, when existence was being reshaped by perception. And so we arrive at a quiet turning point. From chemistry to pigment, from pigment to perception, from perception to vision, life has journeyed step by step. And the path continues still. For once eyes existed, evolution had only to extend their reach, to expand them into the spectrum. The ocean, once unseen, had become visible. Shapes swam where only shadows had been. Movement could be traced across the water. Prey could be pursued. Predators could be avoided. The first eyes had opened, and with them, the silence of blindness had broken. But this world was not yet the one we know. It was not painted with the full palette of light. It was a world of brightness and shadow, of grayscale vision, where existence was experienced in contrasts rather than hues. To imagine such a world is to strip our own senses back to their foundations. Picture the sea as a vast expanse of shifting silver, where every creature appears in shades of dark and pale. The shimmer of sunlight upon waves is a blinding brightness. The depths are curtains of black. Between them, life moves like silhouettes, their edges sharp but their essence hidden. No greens of algae, no crimson of shells, no blue scattering through the water. Only intensity, lighter, darker, nearer, farther. For the creatures who lived within it, this world was no less alive, no less vivid. It was enough to detect motion, to discern outlines, to know the difference between open water and the shadow of a predator. These were the essentials of survival. In their grayscale perception, life learned to strategize. Camouflage was born not of colors, but of contrast. Creatures evolved bodies that blurred against the background, their brightness matching sand or shadow, their outlines lost in the currents. Even without color, deception and display had begun. The fossil in our thoughts belonged to such an ocean. It lived in a time when vision was both miracle and limitation. To see it all was revolutionary. Yet what it saw was a monochrome world painted in light and darkness. Its predators were shapes, not colors. Its companions were forms, not hues. Its life unfolded in grayscale silence, a shadowed rehearsal for the symphony of color yet to come. There is something profoundly poetic about this stage of evolution. It reminds us that vision did not begin in abundance. It began in sparseness, in restraint. The eyes learned first to see what mattered most: edges, movements, contrasts. Beauty was not yet a concept. Function ruled. To live was to sense shadow before it struck, to move toward brightness when nourishment was found. The grayscale world was stripped to essentials, and yet, within those essentials was the seed of everything that followed. Consider the human eye today. Within us still is this ancient legacy. Our retinas hold two kinds of photoreceptors, rods and cones. The rods are the elders. They are tuned to detect light without color, exquisitely sensitive to dimness, allowing us to navigate the night. They are the inheritance of that ancient grayscale world, the living echo of the time when vision meant contrast, not color. The cones came later, evolving to detect wavelengths, to differentiate hues, to open the spectrum. But in darkness, even now, it is the rods that guide us, leading us back into that monochrome world our ancestors knew. In this sense, the grayscale world has never truly left us. Each night, when light dwindles and our cones grow silent, we return to it. We walk once more through the same vision that trilobites carried, that early fish relied upon, that countless creatures lived and died within. It is a reminder that we do not simply live in the present. We carry the entire evolutionary past inside our senses. But let us linger in this world before the spectrum awakens. Imagine an ancient predator gliding through dim seas. To its eyes, prey appears as a flicker of movement, a shift of light against darkness. It does not see the shimmer of scales, only the boundary where brightness changes. Imagine the prey darting into the shadow of a rock, vanishing not through color, but through alignment of contrast. Each life is a dance of brightness and dimness, of sudden movements and fleeting silhouettes. What would beauty mean in such a world? Could there be any? Or is beauty only possible when colors arrive, when the spectrum bursts into perception? Perhaps beauty is not bound to color alone. Perhaps even in grayscale there is wonder, the ripple of silver on the surface, the dark stillness of the depths, the sharp edge of shadow that divides light. Simplicity can hold its own magnificence. This world of black and white was also a world of preparation. Evolution was refining eyes, sharpening them, making them more precise. It was not yet time for color, but the stage was being set. The machinery of vision was becoming more complex, capable of handling greater information. Light and shadow were the training ground for the future spectrum. Without this foundation, color would have been meaningless noise. With it, color would soon become revelation. The fossil we carry in imagination lies silent, but within its stone is the memory of this stage. Its form testifies to a life lived in contrasts. Its world was stark, yet alive with purpose. To us, its ocean would seem muted, stripped of vibrancy. To it, the ocean was full, sufficient, dangerous, and wondrous in ways we can barely grasp. And so we pause here, in the grayscale epoch, to honor its importance. It is easy from our vantage point to rush toward the brilliance of color. But without this stage, color would have had no ground to stand on. Vision itself would have had no anchor. Light and shadow were the first canvas, the primal palette upon which evolution began to paint. One day, eyes would open further. They would begin to separate the wavelengths of light, to distinguish red from blue, green from yellow. The oceans would ignite with hues never before perceived. Bodies would become displays, flowers would bloom, feathers would dazzle. But for now, the world remained simple. Simple, but sufficient. Simple, but extraordinary. The grayscale world was not a lack. It was a beginning. It was the breath before the song, the silence before the music, the dim outline of possibility waiting to unfold. Life does not leap into abundance. It begins in quiet, builds in layers, ascends step by step. From light and dark, the spectrum would one day emerge. But in this pause, in this world of contrasts, we see the patience of evolution, the restraint before revelation. And so the ancient ocean shimmered in silver and shadow, holding its life in a monochrome dream. The eyes that beheld it saw no colors, but they saw. And in that seeing, everything changed. Long before vision discovered its full spectrum, color was already here. Hidden in shells, painted in the membranes of cells, woven into the bodies of creatures that would never truly behold it. Pigments were ancient, older than sight, older even than the first nervous systems. They were not created for beauty nor for display. They were born out of chemistry, a quiet conversation between molecules and light. Consider the pigments that protect. Melanin, for instance, is not a decoration but a shield. It absorbs radiation, defending fragile cells from the destructive energy of the sun. Carotenoids, too, appeared early, not to dazzle but to stabilize. Antioxidants woven into the machinery of life, calming the storm of reactive molecules. These pigments, silent guardians, painted life long before eyes existed to appreciate them. It is strange to think of a world filled with colors that no one could see. The seas glowed faintly with microbial blooms, tinted red, green, golden by pigments tuned to harvest sunlight. The surfaces of shells bore hues that went unnoticed. Skin shimmered with chemicals invisible to the very creatures they clothed. The world was not drab, as we might imagine, a colorless past. It was radiant, only unperceived. A secret language was being written, but no one yet had the eyes to read it. The fossil we imagine, buried in stone, carried such pigments in its body. Perhaps they were in its shell or in the tissues that once moved through the sea. Locked in its chemistry were shades we can only guess at. To it, these pigments were not symbols, not messages. They were function. They protected, they stabilized, they allowed survival. Yet, unbeknownst to it, they also laid the groundwork for a revolution. The use of color not merely as chemistry, but as communication. For this is the hidden power of pigments. Once eyes evolved, once the grayscale perception of brightness began to open into the spectrum, those chemical shields became visible. They turned into signals. What was once only defense became language. A red shell could warn of toxicity. A bright body could attract a mate. A subtle pattern could disguise or reveal. The pigments had been waiting, patient and silent, for millions of years until the world finally became capable of perceiving them. Even today, traces of this ancient story remain. In the microscopic fossils of bacteria, pigments are sometimes preserved. These molecular fossils whisper of colors we cannot see directly, but can reconstruct through chemistry. They tell us that the oceans of billions of years ago were tinted by microbial blooms, vast expanses painted by pigments unseen yet profoundly present. To imagine those oceans is to picture waters stained purple, green, orange, not for beauty but for survival. And yet, there is summit. When the first color-sensitive eyes finally opened, they uncovered a world that had long been painted in silence. It was not the eyes that created color, but color that had been waiting for the eyes. This idea, that the world holds more than we can perceive, is humbling. Even today, our vision is limited to a narrow band of wavelengths. Beyond red lies infrared, beyond violet lies ultraviolet, realms of light invisible to us but visible to other creatures. Bees see flowers and patterns we cannot. Birds perceive. But in that early epoch, the unseen was nearly total. Pigments existed as shields, as stabilizers, as energy harvesters. They were biochemical tools, not symbols. And yet, evolution has a way of repurposing. What begins as function becomes expression. What begins as survival becomes communication. The red of danger, the blue of attraction, the green of camouflage. All of these languages would one day emerge from the chemistry that had already been written into the bodies of ancient life. To reflect on this is to recognize the continuity of life's inventions. Nothing is wasted. Every molecule, every structure may one day serve a new purpose. Pigments born of necessity would become the medium of beauty. They would shape the feathers of birds, the petals of flowers, the scales of fish. They would become symbols of vitality, of warning, of invitation. But before all of this, they simply were, silent, unseen, waiting. The fossil we carry in imagination is a reminder of this waiting. Locked in its chemistry, hidden in its stone, are traces of pigments that once shielded it, once shaped its survival. It never saw the colors of its own body. It never recognized the hues that clothed its world. And yet, in its existence, it carried forward the chemistry that would one day give rise to the dazzling displays of life. In this way, the secret language of pigments is also the story of patience. Evolution does not reveal all at once. It writes slowly, carefully, layer upon layer. The language of pigments was inscribed long before the senses to read it arose. And when those senses did arise, the language was already rich, already waiting to be discovered. We too live within that language. We are drawn to colors. We respond to them instinctively. Red excites us. Blue calms us. Green soothes us. Our emotions are tuned to the chemistry of pigments, though we rarely think of it. The flowers that attract our gaze, the foods that tempt us, the skies and seas that stir our feelings, all are echoes of that ancient secret language. And so, when we look upon a fossil and imagine its world, we are also imagining a silence of perception. The colors were there, but unseen. The pigments were abundant, but their meanings had not yet been born. It was a world painted in secret, waiting for eyes to awaken and read its script. The world was never colorless. Only life's perception was. For millions of years, the eyes of the living world saw only in contrasts, light and shadow, brightness and dimness, outlines and edges. It was enough to survive, enough to hunt and hide. But then, slowly, imperceptibly, something extraordinary began. The eyes of certain creatures started to change. Their photoreceptors, once tuned only to brightness, began to diversify. Some began to respond differently to different wavelengths of light. The grayscale curtain began to tear, and through its rip opened the first glimpse of color. This was not a sudden explosion. It was a quiet unfolding, a molecular shift written in the pigments of vision itself. Rhodopsin, the ancient protein that allowed rods to sense dim light, began to diverge into new forms. These new opsins absorbed light differently, each sensitive to its own slice of the spectrum. For the first time, light was no longer just light. It was red, or green, or blue. Though these names had not yet been invented, though no mind yet existed to call them so. Imagine the first creature to see color. It was not dazzled, not overwhelmed. For it, color was not beauty but information. Where once it could only tell light from dark, it could now distinguish one wavelength from another. Algae in the sea might appear different from the sand beneath. A predator's outline might stand out more sharply, not just in brightness, but in hue. What to us is a miracle of beauty was, to them, a refinement of survival. The oceans were ready for this perception. Pigments had long filled the waters with unperceived radiance. Carotenoids painted microbes orange. Chlorophyll spread its greens through algae. Microbial mats glowed purple under sunlight. These hues had been present for eons, but unseen. When color vision emerged, it was like unlocking a world that had already been waiting, already painted in vivid tones. The palette was ancient, but only now did eyes begin to read it. The fossil we imagine lying silent in stone belonged to a lineage that lived through this transformation. Perhaps its world was just beginning to awaken to color. Its predators might have seen it differently than before. Its food might have carried subtle shades that suddenly mattered. Life was not only about silhouettes anymore. It was about the spectrum hidden within them. The dawn of color vision was not uniform. Some creatures developed it early, while others continued to live in grayscale. Even today, many species still see only in black and white. But those that could perceive color gained an advantage. They could tell ripe fruit from unripe, healthy plants from dying, mates from rivals, danger from safety. The world had become richer in information, and evolution rewarded those who could read its signals. What is extraordinary is how this moment echoes through us. Our eyes are filled with cones, photoreceptors tuned to different wavelengths. In humans, there are three, one for red, one for green, one for blue. From these three signals, our brains weave the entire rainbow. Other creatures have more. Birds often have four, allowing them to see ultraviolet. Some insects can see polarized light, invisible to us. Mantis shrimp possess a dozen or more, their perception far beyond what we can imagine. And yet, all of it began here, in this slow dawning, when vision shifted from contrast to spectrum. It is tempting to romanticize this as the birth of beauty. Yet to evolution, it was never about beauty. It was about survival, about efficiency, about advantage. Beauty was an accident, a byproduct. And yet, accidents matter. Through them, life acquires dimensions it never intended. The dawn of color vision was a functional step, but it opened the door to wonder, to display, to art. Think of how different the world must have seemed. To creatures that had known only brightness and shadow, suddenly the ocean floor was alive with new distinctions. Subtle shades separated coral from stone, algae from sand. Predator and prey could be recognized with greater nuance. To us, it would be like stepping into an entirely new dimension, one that had always existed but had been hidden. For them, it was simply the sharpening of life's most essential tool, vision. The fossil reminds us that this shift was gradual, imperceptible in any single lifetime. One generation saw as its ancestors had. The next saw just a little more. Across millions of years, that little more became transformation. The world itself did not change. Its colors had always been there. What changed was the perception of them. The unseen became seen, and with it, the possibilities of life expanded. This dawn also carried paradox. To see more is to be more vulnerable. Bright colors can attract, but they can also reveal. To live in a world of color is to live in a world of exposure. Creatures began to evolve not only to see, but to be seen. The dance of signaling began. Flowers one day would bloom in colors to attract pollinators. Feathers would one day shine to attract mates. Poisonous bodies would glow with warnings. All of it was seated in this first ability to separate wavelengths of light. There is something deeply moving about this. It tells us that perception itself reshapes the world. The universe had not changed when color vision appeared, but for those who carried it, reality became richer, fuller, stranger. Perception creates worlds not by altering matter, but by altering meaning. What had been hidden was revealed. What had been silenced became language. And so, the dawn of color vision was both ordinary and profound. Ordinary because it was just chemistry, proteins shifting, photoreceptors mutating, survival nudging evolution along. Profound because it opened a dimension of existence that still defines how we live, how we see, how we dream. When we gaze at a flower, when we are moved by the red of a sunset or the blue of the sea, we are participating in this ancient unfolding. Our wonder is built on a foundation of survival, on changes that began hundreds of millions of years ago. We live within the inheritance of that dawn. The fossil sleeps in stone, but its chemistry holds the memory of this transformation. Its pigments were painted by light. Its tissues evolved in waters where color was becoming visible. It did not know the miracle unfolding around it. But we can. We can look back and imagine the moment when vision expanded, when the grayscale curtain lifted, and the world revealed its hidden radiance. Once color vision arose, the world could no longer remain the same. For millions of years, the seas and skies had been painted in silence, pigments waiting like secret codes without readers. Now, for the first time, the living world possessed eyes capable of seeing them. And with sight came change. A new dimension of survival opened, not only to live, but to be seen, to be hidden, to be recognized. The grayscale world gave way to the first painted worlds. The oceans were the first canvas. Microscopic life shimmered with chlorophyll's green, carotenoids orange, phycobilins red. To creatures still blind to color, these pigments had meant nothing. But now, to those who could perceive them, they became signals, clues in the eternal game of survival. A patch of algae might appear more vibrant, guiding grazers toward nourishment. A predator's skin, patterned with subtle shades, might give it away, or conceal it more effectively in the mottled light of shallow seas. Camouflage was one of the earliest strategies born of color perception. In a grayscale world, blending into shadow was enough. But once hues could be distinguished, more complex disguises were needed. Creatures evolved pigments that matched their surroundings with uncanny precision. Sand-colored bodies merged with ocean floors. Emerald hues vanished into kelp forests, and transparent forms turned nearly invisible in the blue of open water. The world itself became a puzzle of perception, where to see and to be unseen were matters of life and death. But camouflage was only half the story. As eyes grew sharper, color also became a tool of communication. Bright hues that once meant nothing began to speak. Some creatures evolved warning colors, vivid pigments shouting, "Do not eat me. I am poisonous." Others used color to attract, shimmering with displays that drew mates closer. The silent pigments of the past became living language. For the first time, color was not only chemistry, it was meaning. Imagine a reef in this new age. Once, it was simply a structure of stone and shadow. Now it was alive with messages. Fishes flickered with stripes and spots. Corals glowed in intricate patterns. Algae shimmered with layered greens. The reef became a conversation, a living artwork where every shade carried significance. To us, it would have been dazzling. To them, it was survival, the very grammar of existence. The fossil we carry in imagination may have belonged to this world. Its body might have borne pigments shaped by these pressures. perhaps to blend, perhaps to warn. Locked in its stone are hints of what it once displayed. Traces of melanin, carotenoids, or porphyrins, now transformed by time, but still whispering their presence. Though it never thought of itself as beautiful, though it never knew its own reflection, it carried on its skin the first vocabulary of color in life's long conversation. The painted worlds were not static. Once perception existed, evolution accelerated. A brighter body might attract more mates, but also more predators. A subtler hue might conceal more effectively, but fail to impress. The balance was delicate, the outcomes unpredictable. Out of this tension, ecosystems grew more complex. Predators pushed prey to hide more cleverly. Prey pushed predators to see more sharply. The arms race of perception and display shaped the very fabric of biodiversity. And always there was an unintended consequence: beauty. What had begun as camouflage and warning became something else in time. The shimmer of scales, the flash of feathers, the glow of flowers, all began as survival strategies, but to our later eyes they appear as art. In this way, the first painted worlds planted the seeds of the beauty we experience today. Even now, we can see remnants of these ancient strategies in the living world. The bright yellows and blacks of wasps and frogs declare danger. The shifting colors of cuttlefish cloak them in invisibility. The iridescence of beetles dazzles not only us, but their own kind. These are not accidents of chemistry alone. They are deliberate messages, crafted through countless generations of evolutionary dialogue. They are the echoes of that first turning point, when pigments began to mean something. It is worth pausing to consider how radical this transformation was. Before color vision, the world was indifferent to its pigments. They existed without audience, without consequence. But once seen, once recognized, pigments reshaped destinies. A creature's survival could hinge on a subtle shade, a faint glow, a delicate pattern. Entire species were guided by the invisible hand of perception, sculpted into forms that could be read and misread in the spectrum of light. The fossil embodies this paradox. To us, it seems silent, stripped of its hues, locked in stone. But within its molecular remnants lies the evidence that its world was alive with colors that mattered. Its pigments may have defended it, attracted others, or allowed it to vanish into the seafloor. We will never see its exact palette, but we know it was not blank. It was part of a painted world, part of the great conversation between vision and display. The painted worlds also remind us that perception creates reality. The ocean had not changed when color vision arose. The pigments were the same as before. What changed was the experience of them. The world gained depth not because matter altered, but because meaning did. The same sunlight, the same molecules, became a new dimension of existence. This truth lingers in our lives even now. What we perceive shapes the world we inhabit, and what we cannot perceive remains hidden, though no less real. In the hush of deep time, this transformation unfolded slowly. No creature knew it was living at the dawn of a painted world. No species recognized the enormity of what was happening. Yet, across millions of years, the palette expanded, the displays intensified, and life itself began to weave with color. What began as chemistry became communication. What began as silence became song. And so, the first painted worlds emerged, not as decorations, but as survival, not as beauty, but as necessity. And yet, from those necessities arose a world that would one day overwhelm us with wonder. The blues of the sea, the golds of the desert, the reds of the sunset. All of them are the inheritance of this moment, when pigments found an audience and vision found a purpose beyond shadow. The fossil lies quiet, its colors long gone. Color, it seems, should vanish with time. Pigments are fragile things, delicate molecules woven for survival, display, or disguise. Once the body decays, once minerals seep into the hollowed shape of bone and skin, shouldn't color be the first to go? And yet, stone remembers. It does not remember the way we do, in images and feelings, but in chemical traces, in microscopic patterns etched into the silence of fossils. Through these clues, we have learned that color, though fleeting, can leave behind an echo, a memory written in stone. For much of scientific history, fossils were thought to be monochrome relics. The bones of dinosaurs, the shells of ancient insects, the imprints of scales, were studied as shapes, as forms without hue. But then, in recent decades, something extraordinary began to emerge. Scientists probing fossils with microscopes more powerful than any before began to notice structures too small to be explained by chance. These were not mere mineral stains. They were patterns that mirrored life itself. Within some fossils, researchers found microscopic bodies resembling organelles known as melanosomes. In living creatures, melanosomes are responsible for pigmentation, containing melanin that gives skin, hair, feathers, or scales their hues of black, brown, red, and even iridescent shine. To find them fossilized was astonishing. It meant that a creature's original colors, or at least parts of them, might be reconstructed. The past was not black and white, after all. Consider the feather of a dinosaur, pressed flat into stone for over 100 million years. At first glance, it is a shadow, a simple imprint. But under electron microscopes, its cells reveal tiny rod and sphere-shaped melanosomes arranged in patterns nearly identical to those in modern birds. By comparing them to living species, scientists could infer whether the feather was dark, iridescent, or patterned. Suddenly, fossils could be more than bones. They could become portraits. In 2010, a team announced that the small dinosaur Anchiornis had been reconstructed with striking detail. Its body was mostly gray, its wings tipped with black and white stripes, and its head crowned with a rusty red crest. This was no longer a faceless relic. It was a being with color, with pattern, with a presence far more vivid than we had imagined. For the first time, deep time returned not just in form but in hue. Color in stone is fragile, but not impossible. Beyond melanosomes, other molecules sometimes leave shadows of themselves. Porphyrins, the pigments behind red blood and certain eggshell hues, can persist. Carotenoids, though less stable, occasionally leave chemical fingerprints detectable by advanced tools. Each fossil carries a riddle. What pigments remain? What patterns can be trusted? What has been erased? The work is delicate, uncertain, but profoundly moving. It is as if the stones themselves are reluctant storytellers, revealing just enough to remind us that the past was once radiant. The fossil we imagine, the one buried before color existed, or at least before color was widely perceived, may hold such a memory. Its molecules may be broken, rearranged, nearly gone. Yet even so, there might be traces, faint outlines of pigments that spoke to predators or mates, signals that meant life or death. In silence, these whispers remain, and when uncovered, they remind us that every fossil is not only a skeleton, but also a ghost of presence, a faint reflection of how a creature once shone in the light of its own world. What makes this so profound is that it connects us to a truth often forgotten. That color is not just a human experience. It is woven into life itself, into the very fabric of evolution. Fossils preserve not only bones, but also the language of color, the silent conversations of creatures long gone. In reconstructing these hues, We glimpse not only what they looked like, but how they lived, how they signaled, how they survived. Imagine walking through a museum, standing before the stone imprint of a wing or shell, and realizing that its color has been resurrected. The dull gray slab becomes a portal. You are no longer staring at silence, but at a message carried across 100 million years. The patterns that once shimmered under ancient suns are alive again, if only in imagination. The memory of color has survived its own disappearance. There is a paradox here. Fossils are symbols of death, of what has been lost. Yet within them lies the possibility of resurrection, not of flesh, but of perception. They allow us to re-enter a world that has vanished, to feel the nearness of beings who lived when the continents were still drifting apart, when the seas surged with forms now extinct. Color, fragile though it is, becomes the most intimate bridge between then and now. And still, we must be humble. Fossils do not give us certainty. They give us glimpses, probabilities, approximations. A pattern of melanosomes may suggest iridescence, but we cannot be sure of the precise shimmer. A chemical trace may hint at red, but the saturation, the vibrancy, may be lost. The memory of color in stone is imperfect, like a dream half remembered. Yet it is enough. Enough to remind us that the past was not dull, not blank, but alive with light. The fossil in our hands, real or imagined, is not simply rock. It is a painting hidden within rock. A painting without pigment, yet not without memory. It asks us to slow down, to look deeper, to see beyond what is visible. In doing so, it invites us to recognize that every silence carries echoes, and every absence carries presence. Even in stone, color does not vanish completely. It waits. And so, the memory of color in stone teaches us a final lesson, that nothing is ever wholly gone. Not life, not beauty, not even the most fragile hues. They persist in fragments, in shadows, in molecules barely clinging to form. To find them is to know that time is porous, that even across hundreds of millions of years, the radiance of a living being can still reach us. The fossil does not speak, but it remembers, and in its memory, we rediscover not only the colors of creatures long gone, but also the truth that our own colors, too, will leave traces, echoes, imprints. Perhaps one day, far in the future, someone will look into stone and see the faint memory of us. When we think of color, we imagine the palette available to us now, the reds of sunsets, the blues of oceans, the greens of forests, the endless gradations in between. Yet there is a quiet truth we often overlook. This palette is not eternal. It is a product of biology, chemistry, and perception. It has changed before, and it will change again. In the deep past, there may have been hues no longer visible on Earth, spectrums of life and light now erased, forgotten like languages without speakers. To imagine these lost spectrums is to recognize how fragile even beauty itself can be. The colors of life are born from molecules, melanin, carotenoids, porphyrins, structural patterns that bend light. But not all molecules persist. Some pigments that once painted ancient creatures have long since vanished, leaving no trace in modern biology. Perhaps there were creatures clothed in hues our eyes could not even name, colors beyond our spectrum of experience, shades that would seem alien and impossible to us now. Evolution, indifferent to our sense of beauty, has allowed some of these pigments to disappear, replaced by others better suited to survival. Even among the living, perception limits what we know. Human eyes are tuned to 3 types of photoreceptors, sensitive to red, green, and blue. From these, our brains weave the rainbow we call visible light. But this is only a fragment of the spectrum. Bees see into ultraviolet, perceiving patterns on flowers invisible to us. Birds detect a richer spectrum with 4 types of cones, allowing them to experience colors we cannot imagine. Hues that have no names in our languages because they lie outside our vision. For us, they are forgotten before they are even known. What then of creatures long gone? Did trilobites in ancient seas perceive polarized light, shimmering displays invisible to us? Did Cambrian worms glow in wavelengths that no longer exist in today's biosphere? Were there pigments in Precambrian microbes that refracted sunlight in ways that have since vanished, erased when new metabolisms arose? Fossils give us fragments, but they cannot restore the fullness of what was. The spectrums are broken, the colors untranslatable. There is melancholy in this realization, but also wonder. For every hue we see now, countless others have been lost. The first painted worlds were not painted only in tones we would recognize. They may have been radiant with colors unknown, as distant from our palate as the ultraviolet glow of flowers is to those without vision. To imagine these forgotten spectrums is to admit that our experience is not the measure of reality, but a narrow aperture through which we glimpse it. The fossil we hold in our imagination becomes more enigmatic in this light. Its pigments may have belonged to categories we still know: melanin, iron oxides, carotenoids. Or perhaps they were something else entirely, a chemistry abandoned by evolution, a palette extinguished. To us, its fossilized remains are silent stone. But to the eyes of its own time, it may have been dazzling in ways we can no longer conceive. Its patterns may have been radiant signals and colors that have not survived into the present. Even light itself has changed. The atmosphere of early Earth filtered the sun's radiation differently than it does today. Before the ozone layer formed, ultraviolet light streamed more intensely onto the surface. Before oxygen filled the sky, the very quality of light was altered, scattering differently, painting the air with different tones. Creatures adapted not only to pigments, but to skies unlike our own. In this way, even the background palette of the world has shifted. There are shades that once fell across seas and landscapes that will never again be seen. And yet, these forgotten spectrums live on, if not in sight, then in imagination. They remind us that color is not absolute, not eternal, but a fragile relationship between matter and perception. They remind us that we too see only a sliver of reality. Beyond the reds we love and the blues we long for, there are infinities hidden in wavelengths we cannot touch. Perhaps other beings, in other times or other worlds, see them as plainly as we see green grass or golden sand. To them, our rainbow would seem impoverished, incomplete, strangely silent. The forgotten spectrums also hold a deeper lesson, that beauty itself is temporary. The shimmering displays of ancient creatures, the radiant hues of vanished skies, the spectral glow of pigments no longer made. They were once real, and now they are gone. And yet, their absence does not erase their having been. They remind us that beauty is not permanent, but fragile, fleeting, bound to time. Its value is not diminished by this fragility, it is enhanced by it. So when we look at a fossil, we must remember not only the colors we can reconstruct, but also the ones we cannot. The ones that have no name, no trace, no echo. The ones that lived and vanished, carried in bodies now turned to stone. The forgotten spectrums are not accessible to us, but they are part of the story of life. They remind us that reality is wider than our senses, older than our imaginations, and more mysterious than even our most poetic visions. Perhaps this is the most humbling truth. The fossil was buried before color as we know it existed, and yet it was not colorless. It was painted in a spectrum we have lost. To us, it is stone, gray, and silent. To itself, it was radiant in hues beyond recovery. And so we must learn to honor what we cannot know, to feel wonder for what will never return, to let silence itself remind us of the infinite colors that lie beyond our grasp. The forgotten spectrums are not simply lost colors. They are reminders of how small our vision is, how vast the world has always been, how much lies beyond the horizon of human perception. They are a call to humility, but also to wonder, to close our eyes and imagine the hues we will never see, to let ourselves drift into a palette not of sight, but of silence. Color is older than us, older than our words, older than our sight. It belonged first to minerals and skies, to pigments carried in the skin of fish, in the shells of insects, in the feathers of dinosaurs. Yet, when humans arrived, something changed. Color became not only a survival tool but a story, a symbol, a thread woven into language and myth. We did not invent color, but we inherited it, and in that inheritance, we gave it meaning. At first, our ancestors must have lived in a world of sensation without names. The blue of the sky, the green of leaves, the red of blood. These hues were known in the body, in the eyes, in instinct, but not yet in words. Language, when it came, revealed something curious. Not all colors appeared at once. Ancient texts show that the earliest words for color were not spread evenly across the spectrum. The oldest known descriptions name black and white, or light and dark, before any others. Then came red, the color of blood, of life, of danger. Yellow and green appeared later. Blue was the last to be named, so rare in nature that even the vastness of the sky was once described not as blue, but as wine dark or metallic. This slow birth of color words suggests that human perception has always been layered with meaning. We saw before we named, but once we named, colors became woven into thought. They became symbols. They became memory. What once was merely a wavelength of light became the language of myth and ritual. Across cultures, colors have carried weight far beyond their physical reality. In ancient Egypt, black was not simply the absence of light, but the color of fertility, of the rich soil left by the Nile. Green symbolized rebirth. Gold, the eternal flesh of the gods. In China, red came to signify luck and vitality, while in the Maya world, the four directions were painted in four sacred hues: red for east, black for west, white for north, yellow for south. Each culture shaped its palette as a mirror of its cosmology, painting the universe in human imagination. But the inheritance of color is not only symbolic, it is biological as well. Our eyes, tuned to red, green, and blue, are the outcome of ancient evolutionary pathways. Long ago, most mammals lost the ability to see certain wavelengths, becoming dichromatic, seeing a simpler spectrum. But in the lineage of primates, a genetic shift restored trichromatic vision, allowing us to once again distinguish reds and greens. This change altered our destiny. With this vision, our ancestors could better detect ripe fruits among leaves, better read subtle shifts in skin tone, better navigate a world where survival was written in shades. Our human rainbow was born not from art, but from survival itself. And yet, we did not stop at survival. We carried color into art, into ritual, into dream. From the ochres painted on cave walls 30,000 years ago, to the indigo dyes carried across trade routes, to the stained glass of cathedrals, color became a vessel for the sacred. It became a way of saying what words could not, a way of touching mystery. Every civilization has left behind its palette, a fossil not of bones, but of imagination. When we stand before ancient paintings, we are reminded that color, too, has its fossils. The pigments, ground from minerals, mixed with oils or water, spread on walls and cloth, are fragments of a vanished world. The blue of Egyptian tombs made from ground lapis lazuli mined in distant mountains. The crimson of Roman frescoes from cinnabar ground into powder. The deep black of charcoal sketches carried forward from fire to canvas. These colors, like fossils, preserve echoes of lives long gone, carrying across centuries the visions of those who once dreamed them. Our inheritance of color is thus double. We inherit it from biology, in the shape of our eyes and our nerves, and from culture, in the shape of our stories and our symbols. To see color is to stand at the meeting point of nature and meaning, of survival and beauty. It is to carry within us the long history of life's pigments and the equally long history of human imagination. Yet, like fossils, color also reminds us of impermanence. Pigments fade. Paintings crumble. The dyes that once lit up tapestries with fire and light now sit dulled in museum cases. Even the words we use to name colors shift with time. The ancient wine-dark sea is no longer the blue we claim today. Our palette is not fixed, it evolves with us. And perhaps, just as spectrums have been lost before, new ones will be lost again. Our inheritance is fragile. Still, in this fragility lies beauty. Every time we open our eyes, we are participating in something ancient, something vast. The colors we see are not merely physical events. They are echoes of survival, of myth, of memory. When we call the sky blue, we are speaking with a voice shaped by both evolution and culture, by pigments in the world and pigments in our ancestors' imaginations. To inherit color is to inherit both life and meaning. And so, when we look at a fossil and wonder at its lost palette, we are also reflecting on ourselves. The fossil may have carried hues we cannot reconstruct, pigments we cannot name. But so too our own colors are temporary, bound to the fragility of time. One day, the blues we know may fade from language. One day, the greens of forests may exist only in memory. Our inheritance is temporary, but it is also luminous for as long as it lasts. To inherit color is to belong to a lineage not only of life, but of beauty. It is to carry in our sight both the ancient pigments of earth and the human stories painted upon them. It is to live within a rainbow that is both fragile and eternal, both fleeting and enduring. The fossil remembers in silence. We remember in color. And together, we weave a story that stretches from the first pigments of microbes to the painted dreams of humanity. Every extinction is not only the loss of a species, but the loss of its colors. When a bird vanishes, so too does the shimmer of its feathers. When a flower goes silent, its pigments are buried with it. The palette of the earth changes with every disappearance, as surely as the soundscape shifts when songs are no longer sung. Extinction is the silence of color, the fading of hues that once painted the living world. To imagine this is to recognize that our world's palette is not fixed. It is fluid, fragile. Even within human memory, colors have been lost. The passenger pigeon, once flying in flocks that turned skies into rolling clouds, was painted in soft blues, grays, and pinks. Its last living body carried with it the final appearance of those hues. The Carolina parakeet, with its vivid green body and golden head, vanished from American forests, leaving behind not only silence, but also a color combination now erased from wild flight. The thylacine, striped and spectral, carried its muted palette into. And yet, extinction is not only biological, it is ecological. When entire ecosystems collapse, palettes are lost on scales that defy measure. Imagine the end Permian extinction, when over 90% of species disappeared. The oceans, once radiant with reefs and swarms, may have dimmed into monotone lifelessness. The forests, stripped of diversity, would have dulled, losing not just individuals but the very interplay of colors between flowers, insects, and birds. Extinction drains vibrancy not only. The fossil we imagine reminds us of this truth. It is a survivor not of life, but of memory. It whispers of a time when its own palette existed, when its pigments played roles in its survival, its attraction, its camouflage. But its burial was also the burial of countless other colors that vanished without trace. Each fossil is a fragment of a lost palette, an incomplete canvas of life. To hold one is to recognize how much is missing. Extinction also reveals the temporality of beauty. We are accustomed to thinking of beauty as eternal, as though a bird's song or a flower's bloom will always return with the seasons. But extinction interrupts this cycle. It is a final silence. The bird's colors will not return, the flower's pigments will not shine again. Beauty, we discover, is not only fleeting in the moment, it is fleeting across epochs. What seems timeless is fragile, dependent on the survival of forms that can vanish. And yet, extinction deepens our sense of wonder. To know that beauty can be lost is to recognize how rare it is to see it at all. Every glance at a butterfly's wings is a privilege, every view of a coral reef a fleeting miracle. The palette of extinction teaches us gratitude. It teaches us that the rainbow we live within is not permanent, but borrowed, fragile, entrusted to us for a moment. To see color is to be alive in a window of time when those colors exist. The palette of extinction also challenges us with responsibility. If every vanished species takes its hues with it, then every choice we make carries weight. The forests we cut, the reefs we bleach, the skies we warm, these are not abstractions. They are the erasure of palettes. They are the narrowing of the rainbow. They are the bleaching of the world. To let extinction unfold is to live in a world less vibrant, less beautiful, less alive in color. But extinction is not only loss. It is also transformation. New species arise carrying new pigments. Evolution paints new canvases. The dinosaurs may be gone, but their descendants, the birds, carry feathers radiant with colors undreamed of in the past. Coral reefs, if given the chance to recover, can bloom again with hues as vivid as before. Extinction narrows the palette, but time can reawaken it in new forms. Life paints again, differently, unpredictably, endlessly. The palette of extinction, then, is both grief and hope. It is grief for what is lost, hues erased forever. It is hope for what may come, colors yet unborn. To reflect on it is to stand between mourning and wonder, between silence and song. It is to acknowledge that beauty is fragile, but also that life is resilient, always seeking new pigments, new spectrums, new visions. The fossil, buried before color as we know it existed, is a symbol of this truth. It tells us that palettes change, that hues arise. The palette of extinction is not an ending, but a turning. It is the silence before a new symphony, the blank canvas before a new rainbow is born. So let us look upon the world not as a permanent gallery, but as a living painting, always at risk, always in bloom. Let us remember that extinction is not only the loss of bodies, but the loss of colors. And let us honor the palette we have, fragile and radiant, before it too becomes a fossil in the memory of time. Colors fade, species vanish, ecosystems collapse. Yet behind this impermanence lies something more enduring, something vast and cosmic. If the palette of extinction is the silence of life's pigments, then the eternal palette is the spectrum that remains, whether or not we are here to witness it. It is the palette of the universe itself, woven not in the scales of fish or the wings of birds, but in the light of stars, the glow of galaxies, the very structure of matter. Long before eyes evolved to see, before pigments shimmered in shells or petals, there was light. The first stars ignited in the dark, scattering photons across the newborn universe. Red giants, white dwarfs, blue supergiants, all were painted in temperatures, in radiation, in energy turned into color. These colors existed without an observer, hues defined not by meaning but by physics. When we speak of the eternal palette, we are speaking of this, of wavelengths woven into the fabric of existence, unbound by biology, unburdened by survival. Consider the cosmic microwave background, the faint afterglow of the Big Bang itself. Though invisible to human eyes, it carries within it a spectrum, a radiation that permeates the universe. It is not color as we know it, not a hue we can name, but it is a kind of ancient light, older than stars, older than galaxies. To call it color is to stretch language, but in a sense, it is the first paint on the canvas of time. The eternal palette is not only in light, but in atoms themselves. When electrons leap between energy levels, they release photons at precise frequencies, each element singing its own spectral signature. Hydrogen glows with a characteristic red, helium with a soft yellow, oxygen with greens that ripple in nebulae. Every star, every gas cloud, every aurora is a composition written in these spectral lines. Whether eyes are there to see them or not, they shimmer. They endure. They are the eternal pigments of the cosmos. And yet, when we look upon them, we translate. Our eyes, limited to a narrow band of wavelengths, see only a sliver of this eternal palette. Bees see ultraviolet. Snakes sense infrared. Machines now extend our vision further still, into radio waves, gamma rays, X-rays. The eternal palette is vast, infinite in its wavelengths, yet we live inside only one fragile window. What we call red or blue is not universal but local, a translation of physics into perception. Still, beneath perception, the palette exists. This is the paradox of the eternal palette. It is both impersonal and deeply intimate. On one hand, it is indifferent. Light travels whether or not it is seen. Colors radiate whether or not they are named. On the other hand, the very fact that our eyes evolved within this spectrum means that our lives are tuned to it. The eternal palette shaped us. We are children of starlight, our vision molded by the sun's emission, our pigments by the chemistry of Earth. What we see is not arbitrary, but resonant with the cosmos. In this way, color becomes a bridge between the fleeting and the eternal. A butterfly's wing fades, a flower wilts, a bird vanishes, but the wavelengths remain, the physics endures. Even if all life were extinguished, the stars would still shine in red and blue. Nebulae would still glow in green. Auroras would still ripple with spectral light. The eternal palette does not depend on us, but it includes us, for we are made of it. To contemplate this is to soften the grief of extinction. If the palette of life is fragile, the palette of the universe is enduring. Species vanish, but the starlight that once lit them still travels. Colors fade, but wavelengths continue to dance through space. Beauty, though fragile in form, is eternal in essence. The hues of the cosmos are not erased. They are infinite, always unfolding, always present in the background of being. There is comfort in this thought. To live is to borrow from the eternal palette for a time. Every pigment in every feather, every bloom, every skin is a temporary arrangement of cosmic light. We are like painters who dip briefly into an infinite well, creating fleeting forms that will one day be erased, but whose source is inexhaustible. The butterfly's wings may vanish, but the ultraviolet they once reflected still hums through the spectrum. The flower's red may fade, but the wavelength of red will never disappear. And perhaps this is what it means to speak of eternity, not permanence in form, but permanence in possibility. Life is a fleeting canvas, but the colors with which it paints are eternal. Every living being is a translation of cosmic light, a brief song composed in wavelengths that have no end. The fossil we imagine, buried before color as we know it, reminds us of this truth. Its pigments may be gone, its hues unknowable, its palette erased. But the light that once illuminated it, the spectrum that once fell upon its body, still travels. Somewhere, photons that touched its skin are still moving through space, carrying with them the silent memory of its form. Even extinction cannot erase the eternal palette. It can only rearrange the way it is expressed. When we gaze at the night sky, we are not only looking outward but backward, into this eternal spectrum. The stars we see may have died long ago, but their light still paints the heavens. We see not only what is, but what was. Color becomes time made visible, memory carried on waves of light. The eternal palette is also the eternal archive. To rest in this thought is to feel small, but also deeply connected. We are not separate from the palette of the universe. We are its inheritors, its participants, its living brushstrokes. Our eyes are tuned to it. Our stories are painted with it. Our lives are lit by it. Even when our species is gone, even when Earth is silent, the eternal palette will remain, shimmering across galaxies, woven into the fabric of space-time. It is here that the narrative bends toward closure. For though color as we know it was not always present, though it fades and returns, though it vanishes and is reborn, its essence has no end. It is eternal, unbroken, infinite. The fossil remembers silence. We remember color. The universe remembers light. And so, the eternal palette waits, not in museums, not in books, not even in our eyes, but in the spectrum itself, always ready to be seen again, always shining, always present, even when no one is watching. There comes a moment each day when colors fade. The sun dips below the horizon, and the world is slowly drained of its palette. Greens lose their sharpness, reds soften into grays, blues dissolve into shadow. One by one, pigments surrender to the deepening dark. We do not notice the exact moment of transition. It is gradual, almost secret, but it comes, always it comes. Night falls and color sleeps. In this daily fading, we glimpse the echo of deeper truths. Just as species vanish and palettes collapse, so too do we each evening move into a quiet extinction of the senses. Our eyes close, the world darkens, and the spectrum we lived within dissolves into black. Yet unlike extinction, this loss is not final. It is cyclical, gentle, restorative. The sleeping of color is not an ending, but a pause. It is the silence that makes the next song possible. When we close our eyes, our perception narrows inward. The eternal palette continues outside. Stars shimmer, auroras ripple, oceans reflect the moon, but we no longer see them. Within us, another spectrum awakens. The mind begins to dream. Colors return in strange and unbidden forms. Skies that glow with impossible hues, faces lit by shades that never existed, landscapes painted in pigments beyond daylight. Dreaming is proof that color never truly vanishes, it only moves inward. And so, The sleeping of color is not absence, but transformation. It is a reminder that the outer and inner worlds are woven together. The universe offers its spectrum, and our minds remix it into new palettes. What we call imagination is perhaps the echo of the eternal palette turned inward, refracted through memory and desire. When color sleeps outside us, it awakens within. The cycle of day and night, light and dark, is a rhythm older than life itself. It shaped our pigments, tuned our circadian clocks, etched itself into our very cells. To sleep is to join this rhythm, to rest in harmony with the earth's turning. But it is also to rehearse extinction in miniature. Each night, we vanish from the world. Each morning, we are reborn into it again. The fragility of life is echoed in the fragility of waking. The return of color each dawn is as miraculous as the persistence of life itself. When color sleeps, time itself feels altered. Moments stretch, dissolve, blur. In the quiet of night, without hues to anchor us, hours drift like tides. This is why night invites reflection, why sleep opens space for dreams. Without the sharp edges of daylight, the mind softens, loosens, drifts. Night is not the absence of color, but the canvas upon which memory, imagination, and wonder are painted in subtler tones. And yet, even in sleep, the eternal palette surrounds us. Beyond the walls of our homes, beyond the lids of our eyes, starlight continues to rain down. Galaxies continue to shine. The universe does not pause when we close our eyes. It continues to glow, to shimmer, to hum with invisible wavelengths. To know this is to feel both small and comforted. We rest not in emptiness, but in the endless radiance of the cosmos. Even when unseen, it is there. Even when forgotten, it endures. Perhaps this is why sleep can feel so safe. When color sleeps, we do not lose it. We entrust it to the universe, to the eternal palette that never ceases. Our small human perception rests, but the spectrum remains, waiting for us when we wake. This is the promise of every night. That color, though silent, is never gone. The fossil buried before color existed reminds us of this rhythm in its own way. It slept in the earth for millions of years, carrying the memory of a time when hues were faint, when vision was primitive, when the world was painted differently. It too was silent, erased from sight, waiting. And yet, when unearthed, it spoke again, not in pigments but in form, in the story of its survival. It reminds us that silence is not the end. It is a pause, a waiting, a sleep. As we prepare to rest, we too become like that fossil, still, silent, folded into time. Our colors fade for a while. Our voices go quiet. Our stories pause. But in the morning, they resume. Sleep is a reminder that erasure is not always final. It can also be renewal. So let us honor the sleeping of color. Let us feel the way night gathers around us, softening the sharp edges of the day. Let us trust that, though we close our eyes, though the spectrum fades, the eternal palette endures. The hues of morning already wait in the wings of time, ready to return. The world does not end when color sleeps. It only rests, only breathes, only prepares for the dawn. And as we drift into our own rest, let us remember this. Extinction may take colors from the earth, but it cannot erase the spectrum itself. Sleep may take colors from our eyes, but it cannot erase the dream of them within us. The eternal palette waits in silence, patient, unbroken, infinite. When color sleeps, the universe continues to shine. When we sleep, the universe continues to hold us. To rest is to join this truth. To surrender is to participate in the rhythm of all things. Night is not the enemy of color, but its guardian, its keeper, its silent promise that morning will come. So close your eyes. Let the hues of the day dissolve. Let the fossil rest again in the soil of memory. Let the eternal palette hold you in its quiet radiance. When color sleeps, you too may sleep, knowing that nothing is ever truly gone. It only waits, like light, to return. All stories end in light. Not because light is everlasting in form, but because it is the thread that binds all things, from the earliest stars to the pigments in a butterfly's wing. Light is the messenger, the keeper of memory, the silent witness to extinction and return. And so, as we close this journey, we turn once more to the memory of light. Imagine again the fossil we began with, the creature buried before color existed as we know it. Its pigments are gone, its hues erased. Yet even now, it is held in the archive of light. For photons once touched it, once reflected from its surface, once scattered into space. Some of those photons still travel, perhaps endlessly, carrying with them the silent record of its existence. They may never be seen again, but they are real, moving outward, unbroken. This is the memory of light, that even what vanishes continues, carried in waves we cannot always perceive. We live within this memory every day. The sun that warms us is not only light but history. Its rays left the solar surface minutes ago, and in those minutes, worlds turned, lives changed, breaths were taken. The stars we see at night are older still. Their light launched thousands, even millions, of years before our birth. To look at the night sky is to look into memory, to witness what no longer is, preserved in luminous time. The memory of light is not only vast, but intimate. It is around us, within us, part of our very being. For we too are creatures of light's memory. Our bodies, our cells, our pigments, all were shaped by it. The green of chlorophyll that feeds the earth, the hemoglobin that carries oxygen through our veins, the melanin that shades our skin, all are stories told by light, written in molecules that respond to it, shaped by its presence. Life itself is a dialogue with the spectrum. To live is to remember light. Extinction does not erase this. Even when species vanish, even when colors fade, the memory of light remains. It lingers in fossils, in rocks, in soil, in the quiet architecture of time. It lingers in us too, as we tell their stories, as we imagine their hues, as we keep their palette alive in thought. Light never asks us to preserve it. It does so on its own. But we are its storytellers, its keepers, its translators into meaning. Perhaps this is what makes color so moving. It is light remembered in the moment of its passing. Every sunset, every rainbow, every iridescent feather is temporary, fragile, fleeting. Yet in their very ephemerality, they point towards something eternal. The photons will keep traveling, the wavelengths will continue to hum, long after our eyes close. Color reminds us that though form disappears, memory remains. And so, as we prepare for sleep, we might think of ourselves as part of this great archive. Each day, photons touched our skin, entered our eyes, warmed our world. They leave us changed, and they too move on, carrying the memory of contact. Even the simple act of looking at a leaf, a sky, a loved one is a transaction of light, an exchange recorded in physics itself. We are written into the spectrum, quietly, gently, indelibly. To sleep is to surrender into this memory. When we close our eyes, the images of the day dissolve, but they do not vanish. They are folded into memory, woven into dreams, carried forward. Just as the universe holds its luminous record, so do we. Sleep is not forgetting, but transforming. In the silence of the night, the mind reorganizes, reframes, reweaves. It becomes its own archivist of light. And just as fossils are uncovered, revealing forgotten worlds, so too do our dreams sometimes bring to the surface what was buried. Old faces, vanished places, colors we thought we lost. The mind, like the earth, holds more than we realize, and in the quiet of sleep, it too offers fragments back to us. To rest is to let memory continue its work, in silence, unobserved but profound. The memory of light is also the memory of time itself. Each photon is a traveler, carrying its moment of origin with it, unaging, unforgotten. We are bathed in these travelers every second. Some were born in our sun, others in stars that died before Earth existed. To be alive is to be immersed in the archive of the cosmos. Every breath, every glance, every color we see is part of this inheritance. We are not separate from it. We are woven into it. This is why even extinction is not an absolute silence. The creatures gone, the palettes erased, the vanished blooms, they all remain in some form within this memory. Their photons traveled, their structures fossilized, their chemistry altered but preserved. Nothing vanishes entirely. It is only transformed, rephrased, rewritten in the language of light and time. As we come to the close of this reflection, let us soften into this truth. Life is fragile. Color is fleeting. Species vanish, stories end, pigments fade. Yet beneath it all is a continuity, an endurance, a vast memory written in the cosmos itself. To trust this is to rest. To rest is to participate in it. The fossil remembers silence. We remember color. The universe remembers light. In this triad, nothing is truly lost. There is only transformation, translation, continuation. What begins as pigment becomes fossil. What begins as light becomes memory. What begins as life becomes story. All are part of the same archive, the same palette, the same eternal canvas. So as you drift now into sleep, let the memory of light hold you. Let the silence of color guide you inward. Let the eternal palette remind you that nothing is gone, that everything endures in some form, that the universe itself is a keeper of memory. You are part of this archive. You are made of it. You are remembered in it. Close your eyes. Let the colors of the day fade. Let the fossils of thought rest beneath the soil of silence. Trust that the spectrum endures, that light carries all forward, that memory is eternal. When morning comes, color will wake again. Until then, you may rest in the memory of light.